So, hello, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the fourth Skills for Solidarity panel, Working Together. For those of you who were here last time, welcome back again. Thanks for joining us again. And for those of you who might be joining us for the first time, welcome to the program. We're really excited that you're here tonight. My name's Anna. I'm the project coordinator with Skills for Solidarity. So tonight I feel incredibly excited to introduce you to all of our panelists and hear from them. They're going to be sharing their experiences of what it looks like to work together on projects when you have Indigenous and non-Indigenous folks coming together and working together. And we're also hopefully going to be exploring a little bit about what this new relationship that we keep talking about could look like. So our previous panelists, I feel like they laid out some really great context for us, and now we're going to start thinking about what it looks like to move forward. So joining us tonight, we have South Asian activist and author Harsha Walia, hopefully climate and energy campaigner for Sierra Club Canada, and member of the Beaver Lake Cree First Nation, Crystal Lehman, though we're running into some tech challenges. So if everyone can send good vibes her way for strong Wi-Fi, that would be great. And then we also have 5 members of the Youth Social Infrastructure Collaborative in Algoma, Ontario, joining us. So the format's going to be a little bit different than previous panels, with Harsha opening, and then the YSI crew spending a bit more time letting us know about their project and having a bit of a conversation amongst themselves about what it's been like to work together. And then if we can get Crystal online, we'll have her closing off the presentations, and then we'll jump into the Q&A section for any remaining time that we have. Before we get going, just a quick note that a few of you have emailed to ask if you can share Skills for Solidarity with friends and colleagues, or that you want to use the materials in courses that you're running, so the workbooks and the videos, etc. So definitely, please go ahead. We'd really love for the program to be used as widely as possible, particularly as our panelists are offering a lot by agreeing to take part in the program, so we want it to spread to as many folks as are interested. Just a heads up that we have licensed the content under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike license, which basically just means that you need to give appropriate credit to the program designers, not use the material for commercial purposes, so not start a business venture with the materials. And if you change it or build upon the material, then if you want to license it, you need to use the same license as we're using. If any of that's not clear, send me an email. I can tell you more about how this applies to you, but basically it means, yes, please use it. We've designed it in that way, and we'd like it to go as far as we can. So that's all the notes from me, I think. Oh, the workbook is available. Panel 4 workbook is up on the website, so if you want to download that either during the panel or right afterwards so you can start thinking about some of the questions in there, that would be great. And for those curious how the transcription is going, I just heard from our transcription team, and they are hoping to have everything transcribed by the end of September. They ran into a couple road bumps throughout the summer, but are back on track and are working hard to get everything transcribed for those folks who would like to watch a version that is subtitled. So that's, like I said, I think that's all the notes for me. So now let's jump in with the panel. Again, same format for sending questions in. So email us at skillsforsolidarity, all written out, skillsforsolidarity@leadnow.ca, or post a tweet using hashtag skills4solidarity. This info is also displayed on the site where you're watching the video, so you can find it there. I've got Tess, Rodrigo, and Amara with me from the Leadnow team ready to receive all your questions, and then Stefan is in the background making sure that all of the tech runs as smoothly as possible for us tonight. So with that, I'm really excited to introduce you all to Harsha Walia. So as I mentioned, Harsha is a South Asian author and activist who currently resides in Vancouver on unceded Coast Salish territories. She's co-founder of the migrant justice group No One Is Illegal and the progressive South Asian network Radical, I don't know how to say this word, so it says DACES, but Harsha, I'd love to hear from you how to pronounce that properly. And she's also a co-organizer of the annual Women's Memorial March Committee and the annual Community March Against Racism and the annual Women's Housing March. She works at the Downtown Eastside Women's Center and supports a number of frontline urban and land-based Indigenous communities She's been named one of the most influential South Asians in BC by the Vancouver Sun and one of the 10 most popular left-wing journalists by the Georgia Straight. She's also the author of Undoing Border Imperialism, which is currently in its second print run, and I just saw an update since this is written that it's about to be transcribed into 3 languages, which is really exciting, the success that it's having. So Harsha, over to you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm really excited to hear from you.
Hi, thanks everyone. Is this working? I've never done this Google Hangout thing before. Okay, this is very awkward. This is very, very awkward. I'm pretty old school. Thank you, folks, for organizing. I'm Harsha, as was mentioned. I live in Vancouver, which is unceded Coast Salish territories, lands of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish people. I'm actually a migrant to these lands. I've been on Turtle Island for approximately 10 years. And for me, particularly being a migrant and being a racialized woman on these lands hugely informs my work in alliance with Indigenous nations and in solidarity with Indigenous nations. I guess the first thing I want to say, I won't say a lot on this because my sense from the previous panels is that people have already talked about extensively about why it's so crucial for all of our movements and all people to be in alliance with Indigenous nations and Indigenous struggles and Indigenous law. And for me, particularly coming from a movement-based perspective, I just want to emphasize that all of our different social movements, whether it's environmental justice, climate justice, anti-poverty, anti-racist, migrant justice, whatever it might be, feminist movements, queer movements, all of those movements really need to center Indigenous sovereignty at its core. And so it's not just about aligning with Indigenous sovereignty movements, which is of course critical, but it's also about ensuring that all of our diverse movements have a lens and really have a foundation of Indigenous sovereignty within all of our movements. Because really that's the core social justice issue across these lands, right? So Canada, by its very founding, has dispossessed Indigenous nations, and as a result, the impacts of poverty, of impoverishment, of environmental degradation, of violence against women, all of these variety of social justice issues, if we will, really impact Indigenous communities first and foremost. And so I really want to emphasize the importance of this conversation around Indigenous sovereignty and Indigenous solidarity. In terms of practical skills for solidarity, I'm going to kind of dilute. I've been organizing around, as was introduced, around Indigenous solidarity, both in an urban context as well as land-based context for almost 15 years. And so I've, very many lessons that I've learned and obviously continue to learn from. So none of this is kind of by any means not evolving. It's very much evolving, and I'm learning every day. But there's a few key things that I wanted to share that, in my experience, have been critical for my learning, as well as other folks that I've observed on the side. So I'll start with some obvious things that we can do, and I think some of these might have been covered, and others might not have been, so it'll be interesting to hear from folks. Some of these are really obvious. So the first thing is, really taking the time to educate ourselves about the histories of the lands that we're on, as well as the protocols of those territories. So it's very easy to become complicit in the erasure of Indigenous nations by not knowing the histories of the lands that we're on, right? So Vancouver is a very new city. Vancouver is 125 years old. Vancouver sits on unceded nations, but much prior to the 125 colonial year history of 125 years of colonial history of Vancouver, there's a much longer history of the territories that we're sitting on here today, right? So knowing that history, knowing things like place names, knowing different sacred sites, knowing the stories of those territories are so important. And also understanding the protocols of the different territories that we walk on. And it's really important to not have a kind of pan-Indigenous assumption of what different communities and nations' protocols are. Each nation has very distinct protocols, very distinct ceremonies, very distinct ways in which nations operate. And so it's very crucial to understand those community-specific, land-specific, nation-specific protocols of the nations that we reside, whose lands we reside on. So that's, the first and foremost thing I would say we need to talk about in terms of really practical things when aligning with Indigenous communities is taking responsibility to educate ourselves. The next few things I want to talk about is particularly for people who are organizing in any kind of way, whether it's on a campus group and you're organizing, a student group, or you're organizing in your community or your neighborhood or your community center, or you're part of a movement-based activist group. is a lot of times we see, and this plays out not just in the context of Indigenous solidarity, it plays out in the context of various kind of forms of oppression and marginalization that people experience. But a lot of times, we ask ourselves the question, which is like, why are people missing from this room, right? So a lot of times people are like, well, maybe these communities aren't interested in what we're organizing in because they're just not here. We put out a call out and they're just not here. So they must not be interested. So of course the first question is we actually have to take responsibility to notice who's in the room and who's missing. But the second piece is then, instead of just saying we put out a call out and people aren't coming and assuming that people aren't interested, we really have to flip the conversation and really go to people. Right, and go to people, and instead of inviting people, for example, into our spaces, really go to where people are at. So taking the time to go into a community, to go into where people feel most comfortable, and in a really humble way, really have conversations with people about what people are working on, right? And so not even to make the assumption that people are going to be interested in what we're working on, but instead to ask people what are they working on, and do they want support and solidarity within their community on whatever community initiatives they want to move forward with. And so I think this is really, really critical because it may seem like a simple thing, but it really decenters, in particular, white privilege and white supremacy and patriarchy. And I know those are big words, and it might frighten people. But, we don't realize the degree to which whiteness is centered in our society, the kinds of things we take for granted. So when we host a meeting, and it's amazing that we put a call out to all of our friends, but if most of our friends happen to be white folks or young people, then we're really missing out on a massive demographic of people in our community. And so we really have to make ourselves uncomfortable a little bit and really go to where other people are at and to see what they're working on and what they're interested in. And really to not just go to where people are at, but actually ask people to articulate what their own needs are. Because one thing that we've seen quite often, particularly in campaign-based organizing, and particularly with big environmental NGOs in particular, is that there's a dynamic where communities are only approached when it happens to mirror a campaign demand of an ENGO, right? So it'll be like, oh, we're working against clear-cutting. That community doesn't want trees clear-cut either. Let's go see if they want to join up with our campaign. And that seems like a very noble, well-intentioned approach, and it is. But really, instead of doing that, I think it really behooves us to go to communities and ask them what their articulation of sovereignty is. And I've seen that happen a lot of times. I remember about 12 years ago, a bunch of us were working in solidarity with a nation in the interior, the Secwepemc Nation, with the Secwepemc Protection Center. And at the time, the community was fighting against a ski resort expansion in their community. There was a number of environmental organizations that were also concerned about the environmental impact of the ski resort, whereas the community in general was opposed to ski resort expansion as a whole, right? Because the ski resort expansion was basically a land grab on their nation's territory, whereas the environmental organizations had a much more narrow focus, which was just the environmental impact of the ski resort. So part of what happened was that a bunch of folks organized in solidarity at the request of the community, which was to bring a bunch of people up to the ski resort, and it was essentially a convergence and an occupation of the ski resort. And so this was in like 2004, I think. Yeah, 10 years ago now, I guess. And so we brought up from Vancouver a busload. We brought a number of buses up. We brought 500 folks up from the city. People came from Alberta. People came from everywhere. And on the first day of the occupation, what the nation decided to do was they actually decided to cut a number of trees right on the quote-unquote private property of the ski resort and set up a blockade site right on in the middle of the ski resort. And a bunch of the environmentalists freaked out because they were basically asked to cut down trees. And so a bunch of environmentalists, panicked, and they were worried about how, the impact of cutting down trees because they're conservationists and what it would mean. And you could see there essentially the divergence really of an understanding of Indigenous sovereignty at its root, which is that we've been welcomed and invited in to an Indigenous nations community. The way that they decided that they were going to stop the ski resort is by setting up a blockade which included cutting down trees, which they are the stewards of. They, are fully aware of what that means and how to steward those trees and which trees can be felled. But there were environmentalists who were very, very uncomfortable and, refused to do as requested, which was to support the blockade by helping folks cut trees and transport these trees and carry these logs. And so I bring that up as an example because you can see a very clear, again, divergence between what one might assume might be the coming together of, in this case, environmental organizations and indigenous community, but really how it kind of fell apart because people had their own assumptions of what an indigenous sovereigntist movement to protect the land should look like, right? And really didn't allow for people to articulate their own needs. I mean, people did. People articulated what they wanted, but the solidarity aspect of it really fell short. And I think there's many examples of that. That's just one example. And so I really want to emphasize that a key part of being in solidarity with indigenous communities is not making assumptions of what that solidarity looks like, and allowing people to articulate their own needs on their own terms, and letting indigenous communities decide and self-determine those terms of engagement for themselves. And sometimes that looks like, no, we don't really want to work with non-indigenous people or work with settlers, and that's okay as well, right? And connected to that, just a couple more things, which is the importance of building long-term relationships, because one of the other things that we often see with campaign-oriented, short-term, quote-unquote, goal-based organizing is that there isn't a commitment to long-term relationships. There's a commitment to, we have a mutual goal, let's work towards this mutual goal as people in a coalition, but there isn't necessarily a commitment to long-term relationships. And I think that's something that we have to really question. Because again, being in solidarity with indigenous nationhood, being in solidarity with indigenous communities requires us to not approach indigenous folks just as quote-unquote allies for our campaigns, but to really honor and respect indigenous communities simply for that fact, right? Because we need to be in alliance with and need to respect and need to honor indigenous nationhood, regardless of whether it meets some kind of preconceived notion of our campaign goals, but to really build long-term relationships because we understand that as non-indigenous people, that's our obligation, right? That whether or not indigenous people are allies is not the relevant question. The question is, what is our responsibility to be in support of indigenous nationhood, to learn and understand indigenous laws, to offer support. And oftentimes we'll see that long-term relationships look entirely different. So I remember being at a blockade site, and a different blockade site in the interior about 6 years ago, and when the blockade went down, a lot of people ended up leaving the site, and that's something that we see, right? There's a crisis moment, a lot of people offer support, and then support is withdrawn. And one of the things actually that the community ended up wanting was a long-term commitment for people to support a community garden initiative that they had. And really they didn't see that kind of support from the vast range of people who ended up supporting the blockade that they had going on for about a year. But after 2 years, after 3 years, there wasn't that same level of support to really support these community-rooted initiatives that they wanted to continue with. In another community, there was an example where a community wanted to start a community school because we know that racism is rampant in the educational system. It's also a deeply colonial educational system. And so people wanted the support of people to teach within their communities in a kind of deschooling environment. But they weren't able to have that solidarity be met because people were only interested in being in that community when their campaign goals aligned with what the community wanted. And so really to emphasize the importance of long-term relationships. And connected to the idea of long-term relationship is to have multiple lines of accountability. One of the things that is really common, and I've done it, we've all done it, we all will continue to do it, but really have to challenge ourselves, is to not tokenize one or two people from certain communities. Communities are diverse. People within communities have diverse opinions, the same way that any community has diverse opinions, and it's really important to have multiple lines of accountability because I don't think non-Indigenous people and settlers realize the extent to which we can actually impact and even harm community dynamics by favoring and lifting up certain voices at the expense of others. And that idea of interference really has an impact. And so being aware of the ways in which when we're within communities, how we're impacting those communities by potentially tokenizing certain people, and not offering our support to a wide range of people. And of course, if we have long-term relationships, then we're much more likely to get to know the diversity within a community and to really lift up various voices, right? Making sure that we're working alongside women and youth and elders and queer and trans folks, and again, the diversity of folks within a community. And that, goes to, of course, intersectionality, right? Which is that there's varying dynamics within communities, and to really understand the nuance within that, but doing so without interfering. And this is the flip side of building short-term alliances. Is oftentimes people, particularly as non-Indigenous people, think they become quote-unquote experts on Indigenous communities and start to interfere in the internal dynamics of Indigenous communities. And that happens in various ways, right? So-and-so said this, so-and-so said that, or this person doesn't agree with this person. I mean, there's a range of ways that can happen, but essentially honoring diversity without interfering is what I think is critical. So honoring multiple lines of accountability while maintaining the principle of non-interference. And non-interference is crucial because, on the East Coast, for example, and, we have folks there from the East Coast, or not the East Coast, but the East, everything's East Coast for me, but people in Eastern Canada will know that in particular the Truro Wampum is based on the principle of non-interference, but also just the principle of self-determination is fundamentally built on the principle of non-interference, which is that we don't interfere with the internal dynamics and the internal workings of an Indigenous nation. That's for the nation to decide. So those are just some key things that come to mind. I want to end by just suggesting one quick thing, because I heard this and I've seen this come out through these panels in this conversation, which is the idea of a new relationship. And I think that's important to highlight, of course, because a new relationship implies that we need to decolonize, and we need to find ways to subvert and transform fundamentally a colonial relationship. And then the core of that, of course, is land, is Indigenous land, the issue of Indigenous land and nationhood and jurisdiction of Indigenous lands. But also, I do want to suggest that there's many strands that we can look towards historically, and not these things aren't totally prefigurative. And there are histories that are often hidden, particularly because they are non-Eurocentric. There's a lot of histories of racialized people working alongside Indigenous people, and those histories have been actively erased as a result of colonization. And so I really want to challenge this kind of Eurocentric framework of new relationship. It's a really Eurocentric one and a colonial one, because there have been a lot of parallel histories within the context of Canada, particularly on the West Coast where I reside. There's a lot of histories we can look towards, particularly between Chinese migrants and Musqueam communities. There's been long histories of intermarriage, long histories of real alliance building between communities. When the Chinatown race riots happened, Musqueam community folks took in many, many people from the Japanese community. There's histories of trade and bartering between communities on a somewhat equal basis. And I'm not romanticizing these, because of course these histories continue to exist within the settler colonial context. They continue to exist within a context of also racist exclusion of people of color. But that there are pockets of resistance and alliance that I think we can look towards, and we really need to highlight, because a lot of that, the project of settler colonialism actively erases certain histories and certain alliances, and I think we need to be attuned to what those histories are, so that we don't think that we're starting something totally new, that we're somehow the vanguard of a new relationship, that actually resurgences of those have taken place for centuries. And so I do want to mention that. But thank you all for listening. I have no context of time, so hopefully someone's going to cut me off soon, but otherwise I'm done, and thanks for the conversation, folks.
Amazing. Thanks, Harsha. That was, my staff team is in the background watching as this all happens and just being like, man, here she is again, speaking truth. It just rolls out of your mouth, and it's an honor to have you as part of the panel, so thank you for being here. And as for time, we're doing great. A small update is, unfortunately, Crystal's internet has not sorted itself out yet. We had her for about 2 minutes as we were doing our prep work, and then something happened and she isn't able to get back on. So we're going to try and make it work to have her join panel 5, which will be somewhere in the week of September 15th to 18th, as she has lots of really interesting stuff to add to this conversation, but unfortunately she won't be here tonight. So for our remaining panelists, we have a bit more time, so don't feel like you need to rush through your pieces quite as much as you may have been planning to, because we have lots of time left. And yeah, Harsha, thank you for bringing your perspective, and I, for one, hope sometime soon we can just sit down and chat about this stuff. It raised a ton of questions for me that I'd love to talk through, and if it raised questions for you, which I'm sure it did, then remember to email them to skillsforsolidarity@leadnow.ca or tweet them. I see lots of folks tweeting what Harsha's saying, but I know there's questions in there too. So hashtag #skillsforsolidarity. We can get to those once we hear from the YSI folks. So please send them along so we can keep having this conversation and hearing more from all the awesome that is inside your brain. So on that note, I'm going to introduce our crew of folks from the Youth Social Infrastructure Collaborative. So we have 5 people joining us tonight, though there are many others that work in this network. So the YSI Collaborative is an intergenerational network and community of practice that accelerates and amplifies the conditions for youth-led organizing in Ontario. And the YSI Algoma is the first regional hub of the YSI, made up of rural First Nation, Métis, off-reserve, Indigenous, and settler young people in the region. And they're co-creating a community of support for young people in Northern Ontario based on local knowledge and their own lived experience. The first conversation about YSI Algoma was convened in December 2013 in Sault Ste. Marie with 20 young people from across the region. And they came together as youth organizers, and adult allies from across the Algoma district to explore what it could look like to create a community of support for and with each other. And then these conversations led to co-designing a spring gathering called Let's Build a Fire in the Mississauga First Nation in May 2014, where over 40 young people and adult allies gathered to be on the land and to experience ceremony together and have meaningful and necessary conversations about the issues they're facing as young people in their communities, and also the assets and abilities that they have to support one another and make positive change. So YSI Algoma since then has become a safe space for sharing ideas about building safe, vibrant, and healthier communities, while being a community of support for change makers across the Algoma district. And tonight, the panelists that are joining us include John, Ricky, Jessica, Robin, and Candice. So they have a plan of how they are going to work through their presentation, so I will hand it over to them, and I will see you in a while, maybe half hour or so.
Great. Are we on? Okay, we're on. Great, excellent. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much, Harsha, for your opening. That was really, really amazing. Lots of really important points that I think we will take into consideration in our own work. That was really awesome, and really an honor to be on this panel with you and with all the other YSI folks here. And thanks to Leadnow for convening all of us together to have this conversation. So I'm Robin Sutherland. The 3 of us here are in Sault Ste. Marie, or Bowading, on the territory of the Batchewana First Nation and Garden River First Nation. And we're just going to take turns talking about the work that we've been doing together over the past year. Yeah-ish. Yeah. And so I'm just going to do a bit of an introduction, and then we're going to take turns talking about different things and introduce ourselves as we go a bit more. So a lot of what I was going to say was actually said in the introduction. So I'm just going to talk about, a little bit about the Youth Social Infrastructure Collaborative. So it is a provincial collaborative, so it's not an organization, but it's a collaborative of organizations and individuals across the province who are interested in accelerating and amplifying the conditions for youth-led organizing in the province. So I'm originally from this area, but I was living in Toronto and got involved with the YSI through my work there, through some youth organizing work that I was involved with there. And I was moving up to Northern Ontario and thought, wow, this is a really great way of organizing, a really open and inclusive way of hosting conversations together and creating safe space together. And I thought that it seemed like a really good sort of model of working to bring to Northern Ontario, where there's a real lack of social infrastructure for young people to be together and have those kinds of conversations. There's a real lack of support and resources for young people in that area. So I invited John right from the beginning to also be part of the YSI collaborative. So we kind of had this thought together. We're like, oh, this would be really great. How can we possibly bring this to the communities that we're originally from? So that's kind of where it started. And so a little bit more about where the area where we live. So we're in the Algoma district, which is, we just looked this up on Google. It's 50,000 square kilometers, and 115,000 people live here. So it's very rural. It stretches sort of between the areas of Sudbury and Sault Ste. Marie, but not quite over to Sudbury. So it's in Northern Ontario. So it's a very rural area with lots of small communities within it, small settler and Indigenous communities within that space. And like I said, there's really no support for young people like to sort of come together and organize in those communities. And there's a lot of divisions between communities still because of the colonial legacy. So we thought that this would be a good way to start to bring people together and figure out how we can co-create a community of support. So what John and I did was connect with people in the community that we know that are actively organizing in their communities and brought them together. We had 8 young people that came together at first to sort of start having these conversations about what this could look like. Is this a good idea? Is this something that could work here? Is this something that people would be interested in? What could that look like? And so we came together and started having those conversations and then bringing more people in. So we ended up having about 20 people that were that we would convene and have these conversations together using a facilitation technique called the art of hosting. And yeah, so we were doing that, and then all the work was also supported by the Leadnow Foundation, the Ontario Trillium Foundation, and the Michael Jean Foundation. I don't know, that's like a plug for funders, but that's who we got support from, which allowed us to actually do this work together. So I think I'm going to pass it on to Jess. Yeah.
Miigwech Robin. Ani Boju, Jessica Boltek Magician Cause, Bawani Ndonjaba, Makwanda Dodam, Ojibwe Anishinaabe Kwe. Hello, my name is Jessica Bolduc, and I've been working with the YSI as part of the core team. And as Robin said, Robin approached me at some point in our lives to be like, you know, how can we really start something exciting for young people in the area that we live in? Myself and John are going to talk a little bit about how do we design the programming for the gathering, how we organize together within the confines and the structure of the funding obligations that we had and other obligations that we had or expectations that we had on us, and also respecting the culture and the experiences of the young people who we were bringing together. So one of the first things that we did to do that was we wanted to create safe space. So, Robin, did you talk about Chiblo, that we gathered at Chiblo?
Mm-mm.
Okay. What kind of some of this organizing culminated into was a gathering at an area called Chiblo Lake in Mississauga First Nation. And John's going to talk a little bit more about the importance of us choosing that space and what that really meant to the overall outcomes of that gathering. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to bring together young people who were organizing, who were active in their communities, who needed support in their communities, and also bringing in adult allies as well. So in addition to that, we partnered with YSI in Toronto as mentors to us and to help us to really kind of design this gathering and what that would look like. Again, as I said, the first thing that we did in this space when we gathered people together was creating a safe space. So we designated an area that we called the Nest, and it was really the meeting place for meaningful discussions, cultural activities, and heartfelt interactions, one-on-one interactions with each other, to really create that sense of trust and support, and also just friendship between us. Something that we did, which was a little bit of a take on, I think, art of hosting techniques, is we co-created a document together, and really it was a treaty of sorts in that sense, that allowed us to ask ourselves what it means to be in right relationships with each other. Before we embarked on these difficult conversations about, issues in our communities and tensions between families and communities, and tensions between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, we wanted to make sure that that space was allowing us to have those conversations and that there was room for people's voices. So we co-created a document using words and images that described how we could make this safe space, a space that was created out of respect and love, and that would guide our interactions through the weekend. As Robin mentioned, we used we used art of hosting, and some of the components of art of hosting that we used to co-design and facilitate the gathering was a world cafe, which we call the Algoma Cafe because we're in Algoma. So it really what that facilitation technique allowed us to do was to group into small groups to have some difficult conversations and some, kind of conversations about where we can go and what strengths that we have in each other. So we asked ourselves questions, what story about your community do you find telling the most? What are we not talking about that we should be talking about? And finally, what's in your heart for your community? The World Cafe facilitation technique allowed us, again, to break into small group discussions so that everyone had an opportunity to talk and to have their voices heard, as I said. What we also did in our programming was we intentionally shared leadership and power by giving anybody an opportunity to host a conversation or host a portion of the programming over the weekend of our gathering. And that was really helping some of the people that were there to, find that they do have strengths within them and that they can really contribute to a conversation in a leadership role. And really showing people that we were honoring all contributions and perspectives. As I think somebody had said, regardless of if your knowledge comes from academics or if your knowledge comes from lived experiences, really trying to balance and shift that power. So that was really important for us to balance that power and really empower everybody that was there and giving them the opportunity to do so. But at the same time, so what we really wanted to do was to really kind of figure out, help young people bond, but also to figure out what are some of the challenges that they're facing so that we can start to work towards finding solutions towards those. But we were really intentional also in creating opportunities for fun and meditation and reflection as well. So, reminding ourselves of the land that we were on, which was an Anishinaabe territory in Mississauga First Nation, and giving people the chance to connect with each other and with the land through activities such as swimming, hiking, canoeing, and just being out in the bush, as we call it here in the north, in the bush. So we also had, some land-based art with natural objects, and we created a giant Jenga that we called Yenga for YSI, which allowed everybody to decorate a block with their skills. So, speaking their skills out loud, and whether they be keeping the fire or facilitating a conversation, to recognize that all of these strengths are really important if we're going to work together. And really what we did was we built those all up to really represent that all of our strengths in one is really what can give us a voice and give us a power in the type of organizing and community work that we want to do. So that's kind of a little bit about the programming aspect of the gathering that we did. Robin, did I miss anything about the actual, like, that doesn't make sense about what the gathering was about? That you were supposed to cover.
Sorry, I was. Yeah, so I guess the gathering was, so the intention behind it was to bring young people together to have conversations that matter and talk to each other about the question, how can we co-create a community of support for young people in Algoma? And the idea behind it was also to figure out what we need as young people, like what does that mean here in our reality, in our lived experience, and how does that relate to the YSI collaborative model of working, which was mostly existed in the GTA area. So there's lots of youth organizing happening there, and it's a good community of support there, but what does that look like when it's translated to the context that we're working within? And then what does that look like carrying forward? Like, and how can we move that forward together and co-create that? So that's, yeah, pretty much what the goal was of that.
And as Robin said, I think that we had 40 people that came together at this gathering, and not intentionally, but just by, I think, virtue of the demographics in this area, that there was a lot of young Indigenous people who wanted to find a way to make an impact on their communities, and that these young people were almost in a sense sending out beacons, and that we, that positive energy really brought us together, and that was a special thing and something that you really can't use words to describe how the right people came together at that time. So it was really interesting. So I don't think that there was necessarily an intention to have this Indigenous and non-Indigenous dichotomy, but that happened just because of the special things that exist in this area and in Algoma, and the young people who are doing things here. So I'd like to pass it on to John now to maybe add to anything that I said, and also talk about some of the cultural programming that we incorporated into the gathering.
Ani Bojo, John Keda Dishnakaz, Mississauga First Nation, Donjaba, Mayangun Dorem, Anishinaabe, Kandao. Yeah, Robin and Jessica touched on some really important points for one of the reasons why we put this together. And when we reached out to the people that we really wanted to be a part of this and invite other people to come along, a lot of it had to do with the fact that we were reaching out to people who had been for some time doing this kind of work, but on an individual level. And we've seen that as an opportunity to invite them and say, like, hey, would you like to come and join up with us, just to see where these conversations can go and how we can work together on becoming a community of support. So that was one of the reasons that we invited the people that ended up showing up. But also, in terms of how we went about designing this particular gathering, we were very intentional about how we wanted it to look, who we wanted to involve in these conversations. So we reached out to local elders, mentors, and for that kind of guidance and direction for us to go down, being very respectful of who is in this territory and how we can work with them and work with the land to properly respect it. And just making sure that everybody is involved and has the voice. Nobody really took, nobody was like the de facto leader in any of this design. It was all done collaboratively, which I think was the a decision, because it allowed a lot of people over the course of the design and throughout the gathering itself for people to come out of their shells that have really been a bit shy, or maybe felt like maybe they didn't know that they had that ability to step out and say what was on their mind. And so when we developed the gathering, we also had that space where people can get together and have those conversations that may have been on their minds, but to do that in a way that allows them to feel equally expressed within that space.
Can I add something to that, John?
Yeah.
On the flip side of that, it also gave the opportunity for people who were like organizing nonstop to like take a breath and hand it over. And that was a really wonderful thing to be able to experience too.
Yeah, and it was definitely an experience having to develop this gathering in conjunction with the people in the Algoma Core group, the people in Toronto at the YSI, and then within ourselves as the design team. Bringing all of these different aspects together was a challenge, but it was also a good learning experience. And knowing that all of this is so new, like Jess and Robin have mentioned, we knew we were treading on new water that we haven't even really touched before. So that's still going on. We'll talk about that a little bit more. So another aspect of the design was incorporating the cultural teachings for the gathering, and making sure that everything that's happening in there is happening in the most welcoming way possible. There was no issues that we would touch on that would offend somebody, and so a lot of the advice that we got from the elders, and one of the elders that was with us throughout the gathering, Gerard, really helped us in bringing in people with First Nations knowledge and background, and people without that, and people with a different context from that, from a rural perspective and an urban perspective. We had things like sunrise ceremonies, sharing circles, and just ceremonies that allow people to become a part of the cultural teachings and make them feel welcome to share their feelings and expressions, whatever may be on their mind at that point. And something that we really wanted to have there too, and we ended up having it, was drumming. We had women's drummers. Candace was one of our drummers there, along with Tracy, who's another part of our YSI core. We had the big drum there, which is composed of First Nation youth from Serpent River First Nation and Mississauga First Nation, and that was bringing that cultural component into the mixture and allowing the youth there to really get a sense of where we were coming at with our intentions and how they can be a part of that moving forward. Because when we say youth, we're talking about everybody from teenagers all the way up through 30. That's something that was very important. We want to make sure that we have the demographics down and fully represented. And one of the reasons why we chose Chibla Lake Lodge was based on, again, the advice that we'd gotten from our elders and through our own lived experiences. Chibla Lake Lodge made the most sense because of the territories and the types of discussion that we wanted to have. We could have easily gone to a venue just outside of Sault Ste. Marie, and it would have worked, but it made the most sense to happen on a reserve in traditional territory, where these discussions can be hashed out and have a lot more meaning in that space. And yeah, we also extended invitations out to local leadership in the area. We invited chiefs from Mississauga First Nation and Serpent River, and representatives from Blind River to attend, and just making sure that everybody's involved in these conversations so that they can continue after the gathering. I think that was the most important thing for us, is that we have these discussions there, but that they continue afterwards. Did I miss anything?
Oh, I think that was good.
I think that's good, yeah.
I just wanted to add that I'm really proud of us in the way that we did design this, because I'll use the word holistic in that we were able to incorporate urban sort of pieces, rural pieces, indigenous and non-indigenous pieces into this that just gave everyone such a meaningful experience. And I think that having some of our young drummers there to just be practicing, they're practicing, they are competitors in what they do, is showing not some of our visitors to that area that Indigenous culture isn't something of the past. It's something that we live day to day. And as young people, young Indigenous people across this country, we're starting to really try to reclaim that culture, which in lots of ways was taken away from us. So we live that culture, or we're trying to find opportunities to live that in our day-to-day lives. So this isn't a thing of the past. This is modern Indigenous people and young people, and we walk within two worlds, that modern world and the world that we're trying to reclaim from our elders, and the history that that oftentimes isn't told or isn't spoken about.
Yeah, and I think also in bringing together Indigenous and non-Indigenous people together in that setting, young people especially, it gave the non-Indigenous young people the opportunity to experience that as well and see, like, because that doesn't happen here, even though we live side by side, and there's so many there's so many like we all go to high school together. There's a lot of people coming together in those different communities, but there's not a lot of opportunities for non-Indigenous people to actually experience, like doing a smudge or doing a sweat or being part of these kinds of ceremonies. So having that opportunity, I think, is really important as well. And you're able to do that there in a respectful way.
So I think that maybe it's a good time actually to pass it on to Ricky. Ricky, are you ready to talk about kind of the challenges? Sorry, Robin, I'm totally taking over facilitating.
Okay. No, that's cool. I'm ready.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm Ricky Strapp, and I'm Métis with Sioux and Swampy Cree descendants. I'm Wolverine Clan, although I've spent like my entire life on Anishinaabeg and Oji Cree territory, so I'm actually more familiar with that and do not know how to say all that in Michif whatsoever. But I'm living in Toronto at the moment, although I have spent I think about 20 years in living in the Algoma region. So I'm just in Toronto briefly to start the cohort 2 of the Studio Y Fellowship at the Mars Institute. Within the YSI collaborative, my role has kind of always unofficially been the voice of dissent, but I also operate as a vibe watch as well. So at the Chibolo Lake Gathering, it was essentially like my job to look at the power dynamics that were happening as we were all gathering together. So we're using a lot of these sort of open development techniques that allow a lot of people to participate in creating things with us. But even as a group that's like as diverse as we are, I think we still realize that we still exist within and contribute to a system that reproduces these oppressive behaviors. So there's a lot of introspection as us for a group to just see, like, why are we doing this work, and like what kind of guilt or shame we might be carrying from those intersecting identities that we have. Because there's just, like Harsha was saying earlier, the nuances of those things, because you have Indigenous youth, and that could be meaning living on reserve or off reserve, and that's a drastically different experience in and of itself. So with this understanding, like, we all have so much work to do in ourselves, but we're continuously learning from one another through these challenging experiences. There was mention earlier of the co-creation of the Safe Space document that Shannon Moan brought to the YSI group. And I just wanted to talk like logistically at how that works so that other people can reproduce it if they're interested. We just laid out a big sheet of paper, and everyone was invited to like write down or doodle or draw what they would need to feel safe within this space. And then we walked around the room and we reflected upon the themes that were written down. So while this isn't kind of like a perfect contract that's like held to each other to withhold these behaviors, at the same time, it starts conversations about like, what does it mean to suspend judgment when you're listening to someone else talk, or how the phrase "speak softly" can actually arouse a conversation about like what it means to take up space. Because who does speak more often and whose word carries more weight will give insight into how we can better balance out those power relationships within our own group. So one thing that I actually grabbed from a sketch facilitation that Nani Tremblay was doing was the consensus hand signals. And this has been used in a lot of, especially like more activist and sort of protest scene type people to kind of get people as a group to kind of work together, and also to like as a tool and tactic to like not interrupt people when they're talking, rather than jumping in and being like, oh yeah, that's a great idea, I totally agree with you. We actually use the sign language symbol for applause, which is called the umber twinkle, and alternatively, if you don't like something, use the downward twinkle, and that way the person who's actually trying to get out their truths or what they're feeling, they can not be interrupted by those people that are actually like standing in solidarity with them. Because when this happens, you're actually drawing that attention to yourself rather than letting the person who's talking like finish their point and be uninterrupted. Yeah, so that's a really, really nice one. And then also, like, understanding the context of our, like, intersecting identities. Like, I know Harsha also talked a little bit about understanding the history of the land that you're on, but also, like, the diversity of the different cultures within First Nations people. Just like, I'm a Métis person. I have a totally, absolutely independent culture that's different from Swampy Cree and Sioux, even though those are the people that the Métis in my family descended from. So also talking to each other about that so we can kind of understand those nuances. So some of the like really literal challenges that we came up against when we were gathering at Chiblo Lake were because of those oppressive systems that we've all internalized, there'd be certain youth where it would kind of be like just the body language that was kind of being shown towards them wasn't as maybe like engaging as some of the other young people. There was a group of the youth drummers from Serpent River that came later, and we were having a discussion, and a lot of the context wasn't laid out for them. So when we had our debrief later and we started talking about these things that were happening when we all gathered together kind of as a smaller group to talk about these power relationships, we're all like, oh yeah, this one youth is so great, like, oh my god, they're going to be so great when they grow up, and we love them, and they were a really cool youth and they were doing a lot of stuff. But at the same time, I had to bring up the fact that while we were putting this one person on a pedestal, there's this other young person that had kind of been ignored and not given a lot of context for like some of the stuff that we were doing, and people were scowling at them, and it was just like not cool. So we kind of like reconvened and gathered together and made a plan that, you know, like we're going to show everyone how awesome this person is. And you know, they were part of the Serpent River Drummers, and they drummed, and a whole bunch of the people from Toronto who had never experienced a round dance before experienced their first round dance as this group of youth was drumming and singing, and afterwards everyone went up to them and they're just like, you're so cool, oh my god. And it was so awesome just because that youth also like totally immediately took a leadership role. And so having that singing kind of lead up into that facilitation of one of the conversations that we had such a bigger impact than if we just kind of threw them in there. Like, as facilitators, we kind of need to see like what our role is in kind of curating this group and how we can allow these things to happen or kind of address them as they happen and kind of reduce some of that imbalanced power, and also kind of like flip the script on like, you know, what works well and is most efficient, because we have these sort of like ideas of academia being kind of like, you know, this great thing, and it proves like that you're smart and your experiences are valid, whereas a lot of the traditional methods are more effective, and they're like part of our identities. So one of the things that I really love about the group is that if there is sort of this dangerous situation where we have like maybe someone who's not part of our group kind of coming in and working with us, who doesn't know some like cultural sensitivities, who ends up inadvertently triggering a group of people, within the group, we become this like support network for each other. And I remember just a specific incident that happened 2 weeks ago when I was up in Elliott Lake with everybody. This one woman had said something and unintentionally just had triggered a bunch of the First Nations women in the group. And those women that were triggered went outside, and they began singing, and they began drumming, and they began talking to each other. And it was just like, this is how we heal ourselves, is through this. And the drumming is just like so close to your heartbeat. It makes more sense than any sort of psychoanalysis where you hang out in a white room and you just talk to somebody. It just, like Jess was saying, it's a very holistic process, and it's based in the traditions of the land. So it's a really nice group to be a part of. Is there anything else that I should be adding? If anyone else wants to jump into the challenges here. I know we often talk about like our own ideas of like white guilt, and it's very important for us to think about like the whole idea of like being white saviors going into communities, which is why I think the open development part of like how the art of hosting works and how we gather together is really important, because everyone's really taking ownership for themselves and deciding where we want to go from here.
Give it up.
I think Candace is gonna jump in next. Thanks, Ricky. That was amazing.
Ani Bojo, Yijik Nangos Nimkikwe, Dijnakaz, Ginabajing Nadonjaba, Makwado Dem, Manishnabekwe and Dao. Nangos, Kamik and Dao. Chimigwachem Nado. Chimigwachish Pinishma, Redna, Travanam, Wabana. Chimigwach Kode, Nebe, Noden, Nakwe. Chimigwach Minodazun. Chimigwach Mishomas, Chimigwach Nokomas. Hello everyone, my name is Candace Neviu. It's an honor to be here speaking in front of you tonight. I wear this eagle feather tonight just because it helps me have that connection from my mind to my heart, to always speak from my heart. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the preparation. My part for the gathering was asking and offering sema, tobacco, to our elders to come and do teachings, to come and share their knowledge. And my family does a lot of ceremonies, so finding an elder was easy, but it's about how you ask them, because not all elders are always willing to work with um, non-First Nations, so that made it tricky. But I know I had to do it for my friends. I knew I had to do it for the future, working with each other. So the elders that I chose are very universal, very loving, very giving. Not that all elders aren't, but we've been through so much that a lot of them are just, I guess, afraid. But I chose two women, and they were fantastic. They brought us on a medicine walk. They answered all questions, made everyone feel safe, explained everything that they were doing on the medicine walk. And then another woman, an elder, she taught us how to make medicine pouches, and I explained to them, like, because she cut out every single pouch for us, cut out punched every hole, cut out every strap, and I explained to all the youth, everyone at the YSI gathering, I said, that's a lot of work. We don't do that kind of work anymore. And I really wanted to acknowledge that elder for that. Like, that was very kind of her. Because I thought, when we talked that we were going to be cutting out our own, I kind of felt bad. But no, those elders, they want to be heard, and they have lots to share. And it's so important. So, when it was awesome because we went on the medicine walk, and then made the medicine pouches. It really worked well together. Something else I wanted to talk about was the eighth fire prophecy in the Anishinaabe. They said there would come a time when these new people would come, and they will rise, and they would have a spiritual sense or a knowing that sacred knowledge would be coming through them. Sacred knowledge would be unifying them. Because even though we have skin, our blood is the same color. So that's what they said with these rainbow people. They say, Nimki Wablin, Ngichita, rainbow warriors. These people of the rainbow were diverse. They were from all four directions, and they worked together to help Mother Earth, to help reconnect to the land. And through that, I wanted to share my experience working with Robin, working with the YSI. Coming up to this point of the gathering, that was easy when we got there, and when it came to working with the people, that was easy for me. But when it came down to the prepping and the organization of things, I really struggled. I struggled, and I had self-doubt because I learned different, and I know a lot of Anishinaabe and Aboriginal people do. They learn different. So it's hard. I struggled with reading and writing, returning emails, and it was making me fall behind in my work. And that's when I started noticing that we have that communication barrier. A communication barrier we couldn't have working together because we had to get so much done. So Robin was very patient with me, and she asked me. She said, "Well, what's going on? Like, are you okay?" And I felt embarrassed. I felt really embarrassed because I felt like I was dumb. But I know I'm not dumb. And she reassured me of that. Like, so she's like, "No, we're gonna find a way. We're gonna work together." And she worked with me. She was very patient with me, and thank her for that. Because we knew we wanted to work together. We knew we wanted to do great things together, and we did. And it just took her a lot of patience, but she took the time to understand. You know, she took the time to slow down because there was this one time I had so much to do and I felt like I couldn't do it. So I just started crying. And I said, "Robin, like, we're here in your world. We're in the way you think." I was like, "Can we go for a walk? I want to bring you to how I think." So we did. I brought her for a walk on Sault Ste. Marie. We have this island, and it's beautiful trails called Whitefish Island. So I brought her out there, and I explained to her how Anishinaabe people think, how we see things in creation through Creator's eyes. I brought her through in a walk through my eyes in my world. And at the time when we were done our walk, she was crying. And she said, "Candace, I feel like I don't know anything. I feel like a baby." I said, "Now you know how I feel." um, that's what I kept telling her. I said, "Robin, like, I feel like we're a part of the prophecy, working together like that, learning, taking that time. That's what's gonna help solidarity, skills, skills sharing." She taught me so much, and she just had to. We had to keep that communication open. We had to keep talking. As soon as we didn't talk, then we would slip up. But I didn't see her as my boss. I didn't see my friends as my coworkers. I see them as Michke, friends and their family. We didn't have those lines between each other. It was just very flowing, very natural. And that's how Anishinaabe people like to work. That's how we like to work. It's, when you have those invisible lines, it intimidates. I don't know. But this whole experience, it gives me hope, and it gives me strength, knowing that we did this work for these youths. We hear about it all the time. We guys gonna do that again? Like those youths that came out to Chibble Lake, it really affected them because they just wanted to feel home, and we created that because a lot of us are struggling with these issues. And another thing I really wanted to make sure about is it's our humor. Like, we're constantly joking and laughing, even when we're not supposed to be. It's just the way we are. And a lot of times, like, we'd be doing some serious stuff, and I would say, and I was like, "Oh my God, as if I said that." But it's just like that natural thing. Yes, yeah. There's just those natural thing, like, it's just, I don't know, like, you just gotta laugh. It's just healing medicine. And One more thing that I feel that is really important is this fine line that I feel that I walk between two worlds, and I imagine other Native people feel this way too. Is walking in between two worlds. You're serious about that. It's hard. Having one foot in this door and having another in the other. And two different lines, two different ways, two different teachings, two different knowings. And a lot of times, like one side of my family, they're completely like colonized, assimilated. They don't understand Native culture. But my other side of my family, my grandfather is a medicine man, and he brought me to traditional ceremonies, and he gave me my name. I was fortunate enough to grow up like that. But I have my one side of my family telling me, you need to go to school. You need to get an education. You need to keep furthering, you know. But there's that knowing inside of me that feels like that's part of colonization. And that my other side of my family, my other side of my family is telling me, nope, you go build a wigwam, and you go live on the land again. You embrace those teachings. Keep going forward as a Anishinaabe and don't let anyone tell you different. And this, the way we're working together, is helping me go that way. Because I realize how important it is to be who you really are. And people are proud of you when you are that. And they learn from you, and they enjoy being around you. So, I don't know if that's what you wanted to hear. But I thank all my friends from YSI and everyone there tonight and listening. And Anishinaabe, Nani Whip, stand up. Shimmy Gutch.
Ah, amazing. Thank you, all of you. Thank you, Candace. I have goosebumps on my arms, and I love when interactions on the internet can make that happen because it's a bit of a funny, weird online space that we're in. But so, yeah, Ricky just said everyone on Twitter is crying. Our staff team is also all in tears, and Robin, maybe. Anyways, it was just really powerful, the trajectory this panel went on. From all of you, I feel like we started in this amazing space of hearing, bringing us to a high level of like why this matters and how all of these struggles are connected and our place in them, and then brought all the way down to this one individual experience and interaction. So, so grateful to all of you. We have about 12 minutes left, so I'm thinking to wrap for this one. What we might do is I have sort of one question that I'd love to do a go around on, and so that all of you can respond in whatever way makes sense for you to the question. But it is, let me just find it. So yeah, you all spoke about lots of, that there are some challenges in doing this work. So Harsha, you talked about lines of accountability and how tricky that can be, and learning and communicating and working. And so I'd love to hear from you why about it that gets you to do this work, and what role can you see allies playing in this work? How can folks who are not connected connect in? So start at the beginning again, go back to Harsha and run ourselves all the way through till the end. And then we'll wrap after that.
Sure. Thank you, folks. Thank you for everyone who who just spoke. That was amazing. It was such an honor to hear about the work going on. In terms of doing this work, I guess there's it's hard to answer that actually. I guess it's multifold. One is that I do deeply and genuinely feel a deep sense of responsibility, particularly as someone, like my family, as I mentioned, was not born and raised on Turtle Island. My grandfather was involved in the freedom struggle against British independence in India. And so for me, being part of anti-colonial resistance has been part of my history. And so on Turtle Island, of course, that looks entirely different. I'm not Indigenous to Turtle Island. But that impetus and that drive to be part of anti-colonial struggle is deep. It's part of my family's history. And so now that I reside here, for me it's an obligation, it's a necessity to be alongside Indigenous nations. So for me that really is what drives me, is a connection in a very, very different way and in a different place. But having some sense of what colonization does to communities, that the intergenerational trauma is huge. And so one of the things that we don't talk about, I mean some folks did share, but this sense of living in two worlds, a lot of that of course is trauma related. Like I work in an urban area, I work in the downtown east side, and most non-Indigenous folks, most people who don't live in the downtown east side cannot understand how there's a so-called third world and the first world. And people drive by there, thousands of cars go by the downtown east side, the poorest neighborhood in this country, every single day. And it's an alternate reality, both in terms of the impoverishment, but also the deep trauma. And so for me, that's what compels my work. And also, pretty much everything is like, what's been on my mind lately. But particularly because my family is not here, my extended family isn't here, pretty much everything that I have learned about being a parent, because I'm a new mother, has come from Indigenous elders. And that the importance of intergenerational work and the importance of having elders in our life. And so for me, a lot of my knowledge, pretty much 90% of what I've learned through my now adult life has come from the gift from Indigenous folks, Indigenous women, and Indigenous elders in my life. And so those relationships have pretty much saved me in terms of being a parent, but that's more recent. But it's on my mind in terms of being grateful for relationships and being grateful for not just having a responsibility, but also realizing that as non-Indigenous people and as settlers, we have such an immense amount of knowledge that we can learn from Indigenous nations and communities, and that really is a gift to all of us.
Amazing. Thanks, Marsha, from the panelists that are in the background here. John, I'm going to pass it over to you for YSI. Start it off.
So yeah, one of the things that I think really got us all into this work is just the reflection of where we live and the possibilities that it can exist here. There's a lot of mentality in the rural communities across the Algoma district about the youth that live here. They grow up and they move away and they don't come back and they don't have a good reason to. So we decided to collectively take ownership of that challenge and say, like, okay, these are the kinds of things that we can make happen here with your support. So let's get to work and start making these things happen.
Yeah, I think also as a settler person growing up in this community, I was very aware of the level of racism that exists in these rural communities, and it's still like just blatantly out there. And so coming back to this area, I really didn't, and also realizing like my own role in that and my part in being part of an oppressive system and all of that is just it's not something that I want to just be complicit in and not do anything about. I don't want to raise my children in really the kind of community I grew up in, to be honest. Like here, it's harmful. It's harmful for a lot of people, not just Indigenous people, but non-Indigenous people too. Like who wants to grow up in that kind of environment? And so that's sort of what drove me personally to start having these conversations with people. And yeah, there are a lot of people here. Like I really respect the people that I'm working with, and like Candace said, like I've learned so much from her. I am like a baby. And I cry all the time because the learning journey that I've gone on personally in the past year has been absolutely incredible. Connecting with Anishinaabe friends and elders, and like it's just beginning. But I think that you really have to put yourself out there and take that risk to like not know what the hell you're doing and not know what the hell you're talking about, and but like Harsha said, like be very humble and just listen to hear and listen to like just totally kind of give up everything and relearn who you are and where you live and just basically your whole worldview. It's just being willing to kind of just totally learn a whole different way of seeing things. So yeah, that's kind of what it's all about for me, I guess.
Cool. Thanks, Robin. Thanks, John. For me, I grew up off reserve, so in many ways I feel like I'm following the same learning journey as some of my settler friends in many ways. So not until I was probably in my 20s did I think that it was even important for me to reclaim my culture. I was doing all right just being Jessica, and people knew that I was Indigenous, but it wasn't really part of my identity. So for me, there's that personal journey that I'm going on to try to kind of find myself in all of this work that I'm doing, but it's like I studied economics in school, and it's just really bizarre, which is like dominant economics that looks at ways in which that you can extract resources for profit at the expense of our Indigenous communities. And somehow my path has taken me away from that and opened my mind to different ways of thinking, even though that's what I was taught. So the only reason why I can think is why I do this work is because it's ingrained within my DNA. And that's coming from other places. It's coming from the universe. It's coming from the earth. And that drive within me to do this type of work is coming from that. And I'm only just trying to learn to try to understand what that even means. So for me, for being an ally too, I'm an ally. I need to be an ally. I think we all need to be allies. And for me, that means listening instead of speaking. And that's something that I'm trying to teach myself. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Jess. Candace or Ricky? Ricky, go for it. We'll stay in our little order if you want to say a few words.
Mm-hmm. Do you want Ricky to go first?
Go for it, Candace.
Okay. Why do I want to do this kind of work? Because went out to Edmonton and I spent the summer there, and I was just blown away by how First Nation people were out there. They were just very, very hurt. lots of people on the streets, lots of people hooked on drugs, lots of gang violence. And I thought about home. I was like, ooh, we're not that bad. And I said, we got a chance. Not to say they don't have a chance, people out there. Of course they do. I just knew I wanted to start making a difference, start doing something about it. Couldn't just not try and work with everyone. You know what I mean? So it's really cool because like I was I formed a council last year. It's called the Native Nation Youth Council, and where I got other First Nation active youth, and we do a lot of healing circles, lots of conversations, lots of good activity. But this year was cool with the YSI. Like apart from that, Native Nation Youth Council for YSI. And I like it because I get to work alongside, my my white brothers and white sisters, and we get to teach each other. Because I knew you can't do this alone. Like this kind of work, you can't do it alone. And what drives me to do it is I do have a son, Eddie. He's 8 years old. I just want to make the future better for him and his children, and my little cousins, and my little sister, and my nieces. What can allies do? What role can they play? Um, Allies can provide space, rides, that's really important, and support. It's so important to have that support. Um, because if I didn't have the support of my YSI family, I know I would have turned around and doing a lot of things. Their support really pushed me to exceed my limits. You wish.
Thanks, Candace. And Ricky, over to you.
Thanks. Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that I really identify with that people have said already. Just like that experience of like racism within like our own communities. That they're a lot more like visible and in your face in these small communities. And it's I don't know, like I really love small towns, and I just find it like it shouldn't that sort of like experience of racism and like those sorts of things like shouldn't stop people from being able to live in a place. Like you shouldn't have to go to Toronto or like a large center to like find this like safe community of people with this sort of like understanding and like sharing power and all of that. Like you should be able to live in Northern Ontario and find those safe spaces. And so that's what I'm really interested in, is like just like accessibility of the North to other people, and like meeting cool people like Candace, and like just getting like those different experiences from people, like that enriches my life so much. That's it.
Awesome, thank you. Thanks to all of you. I'm really glad that we ended on that note and got to hear a little bit about what drives you and motivates you and what's kind of at the heart of all this. Because we've been talking a lot about this big system that's out there that can seem big and overwhelming, and it's so important to understand that and how it works, and then also to connect with our hearts and why we're here and why this matters, and how by doing that we can hopefully make things better. So again, so much gratitude to all of you for joining us, and for everyone that's watching, thanks for joining. I know it's the end of summer days and the longer nights are precious, so we're really glad you chose to join us and be with us here tonight. Just a few words to wrap up. Again, some final notes. So we're still finalizing the date for the next panel, but it will be sometime the week of September 15th to 18th. And Jess, who we have with us here tonight, she's going to join us to talk more fully about a project she's working on called 4Rs. So we'll get to hear more from her, which is really exciting. And we're also going to hear from panelists that can give a bit more of an overview of the current organizing context. that's happening nationally and some exciting projects we can link into once Skills for Solidarity wraps up. So like always, if you have questions or feedback, send them our way. And again, a reminder, all these panels are going to remain on the website for a long time, hopefully. So if you need to catch up or if you want to invite someone to join, they can always do that later. And again, our final little reminder that this program really is just funded by small monthly donations by our community. So if you have $5, $10 to send us, then we would really appreciate that, just to show your support for the program. And of course, if you can't, no problem, we're happy to offer it. And so with that, I will sign off. I'm excited to see you for panel 5, the last one, the wrap up of the program. I hope you have wonderful evenings, and I really hope we see you next time. Good night, everybody.